Joining us now, NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard and New York Times diplomatic correspondent Michael Crowley. Vaughn, Donald Trump has talked about this a lot over the years. He's also said a bunch of times that he was joking about policies that he was not, in fact, joking about. Let me just play a few examples.
I've raised a lot of money for the next race that I assume I can't use for myself, but I'm not 100% sure because I don't know. I think I'm not allowed to run again. I'm not sure. Am I allowed to run again? Despite the fact that they say I can't run again. That's the expression. Sure. Then somebody said, I don't think you can. Oh, almost 40% of the vote. Now, I won't be happy the next time. Should I run again? You tell me.
You know, Vaughn, in the first book I wrote about Donald Trump, I thought in the beginning of it, can you imagine Donald Trump ever leaving office? And part of it was half joking, and part of it was, no, I really actually can't imagine him leaving office. We saw a version of that in 2020 when he tried to stay, and I think it's wise to take him seriously when he says, I'm serious.
Right. I think that back in 2016, there was a fake Time magazine cover that had Trump posters for 2020, 2024, 2028, 2056, and he repeatedly posted it several times over the last years. And I think those sound bites that you just played, there's no evidence or suggestion by the president himself that those were ever jokes about seeking a potential third term. And it was last month, this is the same leader who posted on his social media account, quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." And well, of course, the 22nd Amendment makes it clear that a president cannot serve more than 2 terms. This is the same president who is seeking to undo the constitutional amendment to that provides birthright citizenship to individuals born inside of this country. And so at this point in time, he is using his belief in his own popularity within his party and across the country to justify a potential run in the future. And so I think, by all accounts, I think that this should be taken seriously.
I've got a question about the Republican Party. Vaughn, you've covered the party for a long time. We've all, we know the Republican Party. They've always stood up and talked about how they really believe in the Constitution. The Democrats are violating the Constitution. The Tea Party was all about getting back to our constitutional roots. There's a lot of ambiguity in some of the language in the Constitution that you can argue with, you can litigate. There's no ambiguity here. No person shall hold the presidential office for more than 2 terms. This is Donald Trump's second term. Where is the uproar, or have you heard any uproar or any discomfort even whispered about this idea that he's even talking about saying he wants to run for a third term?
You know, our colleagues on Capitol Hill asked a couple lawmakers back in February about this idea of running for a third term, and they suggested that the president was joking. Again, that may have been their hope, but there's another Republican lawmaker in the House that introduced explicit legislation that would allow him to run. And this is where, when you look at the makeup and the construct of the Republican Party today, there's little reason to believe that there would be significant pushback. You have the likes of Don Bacon, congressman out of Omaha. You have Roger Wicker, senator out of Mississippi. But when you're looking at who may actually attempt to stop him, I don't think that there's reason to believe at this point in time that J.D. Vance, the vice president, would seek to stop him from running for a third presidency. So at this point in time, we have not heard strong rebuke in these 24 hours. I think if you had gone back 10 years ago and heard George W. Bush suggest that he would run for a third term, I think that you would have seen across the political spectrum a loud denunciation. But in the 24 hours since the president spoke these words to our colleague Kristen Welker, we have not seen Republicans come out and protest this idea of their incumbent leader seeking to take hold of their political party going into the future.
Methods? Any idea what the methods are that Donald Trump's referring to?
The what?
The methods to run again, to be president? Yeah.
Sorry, one of the methods, the idea out there is that the vice president, J.D. Vance, could run and Donald Trump could run as his vice president and then leave office and then go and take that position. Yet at the same time, the Constitution says that an individual who is seeking the vice president must be qualified to serve as president. So there's a lot of outstanding questions. You could call a convention of states, but at that point in time, you would need 2/3 of the states and their legislatures to approve such a maneuver. There are not 2/3 of legislators that are currently run by Republicans. So it's not clear exactly what those methods would be like and how he could feasibly try to pull this off without going forward and having Republican legislatures put his name onto the ballot in the Supreme Court, essentially backing those efforts at the state level and effectively allowing him to get a certain number of electoral votes that would put him over that 270 electoral count threshold.
All right. So, Michael, let's talk about the other thing that Donald Trump made news on. And this was his apparent, or he says, anger toward Russia. He said he was very angry and very pissed off at Russia's Vladimir Putin for discrediting Ukrainian President Zelensky's leadership. He said, if Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if it was Russia's fault, I'm going to put a secondary tariff on oil, on all oil coming out of Russia. How seriously is this being taken overseas?
Well, I think everyone overseas, excuse me, always wonders how seriously to take the president's pronouncements. But increasingly, I think people put stock in his words. I think in his first term, people were more likely to dismiss things he said as just empty talk or his impulse. The thing that's particularly confusing here, of course, is that Trump has this long-standing affinity with Vladimir Putin. It's been clear that he admires Putin. He wants to have a relationship with him, and he wants to reset relations between the United States and Russia. I think he also, Katie, as you know, has been very eager to bring the Ukraine war to an end. I think in part because he likes nothing more than the idea that he's done a big, difficult deal and, maybe he'll get the Nobel Peace Prize. But what's frustrating for Trump here is he's finding that Vladimir Putin actually is not prepared to end this war. And it seems like even on terms, look, Trump obviously is not sympathetic to Zelensky or Ukraine in general and seems willing to, force terms on Ukraine that the Ukrainians don't want. But even those terms, I think, are not sufficient for Vladimir Putin, who wants more territory, who wants more control over Ukraine, who wants more assurances that the West will not be rearming and re-equipping Ukraine, and possibly wants even bigger changes like American withdrawals from NATO countries on Russia's border. So this is obviously dawning on Trump and greatly frustrating him. The last thing I'll say is, okay, so what's he going to do about it? I think he has very limited leverage over Putin. Yes, he's talking about increasing sanctions and trying to hit Russia's oil exports harder. And you could do that. You could inflict more pain on Russia. The problem is that boomerangs back on the West. If you crack down on Russia's energy exports, oil prices are going to surge. Trump is already dealing with a very unstable global economy, a stock market that is kind of a basket case. And I just don't know if he's willing to accept that price. And that's why I think the Kremlin may be treating this as an idle threat.
What about sending more arms to Ukraine, like re-solidifying your support for NATO, standing stronger with U.S. allies? Any talk about that?
You don't hear much talk about it, Katie, and it's a conspicuous absence. I mean, I do think that Trump and Trump officials have somewhat nodded to that possibility, but it's not something that they really seem to be waving as something that they're prepared to do in the short term. And again, I think Trump is pretty invested in this idea that he's disentangling the U.S. from this conflict. He's going to save the taxpayers' money. But you're right, that is another form of leverage. I just think that Trump has gone pretty far out on a limb, and for him to reverse the policy now, I think would be very confusing to his base in particular.
You've been writing a lot about USAID, Michael. Tell me about what Donald Trump's ultimate plans are with it and how that's going to work.
Well, USAID, America's foreign assistance humanitarian aid agency for about 60 years now has effectively ceased to exist. And the plan is to fold it into the State Department. Now, this is a debate that has been around for a while. if we're going to give out all this foreign assistance for things like humanitarian aid, refugees, development, infrastructure, even democracy promotion, why is it in a separate agency and not the State Department? That idea is not new or off the wall. But the way this was done was so fast and dramatic, not something Trump ever talked about in his campaign. And the question is, how much of it is going to be restored under Marco Rubio at the State Department? Rubio is saying that a lot of the aid will be revived, just run through his department. But it's a huge question mark right now as to how much that's already going to happen. And what USAID officials and foreign officials all over the world say is that the disruptions that have been caused by shutting this stuff down so abruptly are going to make it really hard to rebuild these programs. And last point, trust in the United States has been completely shattered in the countries where USAID was operating.
Yeah, they operate on stability and predictability. When you lose that, it's just not easy to operate any longer. It's not easy to plan for the future. And a lot of this aid requires quite a bit of planning. Vaughn Hilliard, Michael Crowley, thank you very much.